Have you guys been wondering who the best brawlers are for Season 29 for Ranked? Well, in today's video, we're going to be ranking all the brawlers in the game from the very worst all the way up to the very best. We're going to be putting them in a tier list, starting off from the F tier. Those are going to be the brawlers that you just literally never want to play because you'll be throwing your elo, and working our way up to the S tier, where the best brawlers in the game, the absolute hard carry picks, and we'll be also ranking these brawlers in order. So make sure to stick towards the end to get the full ranking. So of course, we're starting off in the F tier, and Doug's going to be the first brawler. So Doug is just completely useless right now. He has no range to even close down any opponents, and he hasn't got any sort of tank trait or anything that really benefits him. So he's just a throw pick. So that's why Doug is in the F tier. Next up, we have Maisie. So she's fallen off since the hypercharge rework at the beginning of the year, and it's mainly because you can't cycle through hypercharges and team wipe. It takes so long to even build up to that first super because her main attack is so hard to hit, whereas there's just other tank counters out there that are just way more consistent. So she's not prevalent whatsoever, and easily a D tier brawler because she's not been used in competitive for a long time. Next up, we have Willow. So another super underappreciated brawler, mainly because there's other throwers that are more dominant, but in pro play, a lot of those are banned straight away, like Berry, Barley, Larry, and Laurie.
But I'm not a rapper.
So Willow's a good alternative, especially on maps like Pinball Dreams, and where Barley would be good, Willow's going to be good. Also, she's not as vulnerable against tanks, so sometimes pros even prefer Willow to the likes of Barley because Willow's super is really good at throwing them away. So I think C tier is pretty fair. So next up, we have Edgar. So another brawler, I've not really seen too much use case for him. Even if I see a good Edgar matchup, I just don't think he's the same as he used to be. So even though there's a lot of throwers, again, I just don't really see too much Edgar. He is going to be good in Hot Potato and a few other instances, but at the same time, he's just kind of mid at the moment, so definitely in the C tier. Next up, we have Darryl. So Darryl's been an F tier brawler for a long time now. He's just been outclassed as an assassin far too often. There's too many hypercharges that counter him, and it still takes him 30 seconds to get his super, and still even then, his super is very lackluster and so easy to read. So that's why he's easily an F tier brawler. Next up, we have Janet. So it's the same type of problem. Even though she can do good chip damage, I think good players can abuse the fact that Janet deals no damage, so she can just get overrun so easily, and that's why Janet's in the F tier. And finally, we have Ash. So Ash is receiving the same problems. Before, he used to always be like a decent brawler in ranked as a late pick, but still even as a late pick, there's so many tank counters out there that have hypercharges that just rip through Ash. So that's why he's the last person in the F tier. So now moving on to the D tier, starting off with our Milky Boy Hank. So I will say he is underrated in ranked, mainly because you can pick him as a late pick. He's pretty good into a few different compositions, and he's actually good in a few maps like Parallel Plays, for example, Hideout. So don't underestimate the Milkman because he's definitely at least a D tier brawler. Next up, we have Piper. So Piper's really dangerous in Knockout and Bounty again, thanks to her hypercharge. I will say the map pool doesn't favor her as much anymore, but she still does an insane amount of damage. And the good thing about ranked is that you can easily switch between gadgets. Long range map, you go Homemade Recipe. Shorter range, or if you're facing off against assassins, just switch over your gadget. And that's the beauty of ranked with Piper. She's got such a good kit. So next up, we have Bibi. So she's suffering the same fate as a lot of tanks right now because there's so much Colette, Gale, Meg, etc. that just rip through her. Again, it's just really hard for her to close the gap right now in the meta. The hypercharge does cycle quite quickly, but I just don't think it's the Bibi meta right now. She's being played literally never in competitive. Next up, we have Colette. So she's definitely been the surprise pick in this meta. Her hypercharge is so good. Her gadget is really good. Of course, she just rips through everything. And even if she doesn't face off against tanks, she's still going to be okay because you can go to shield star power, and it's just in heist, of course, she's like an S pick brawler. It's definitely the meta for her. Next up, we have Amber. So we'll say she's completely broken in competitive, mainly because of the 6k gadget glitch, and the pros know when they get that gadget, if you get what I mean. Only one side gets the 6k, and that can just make you delete brawlers like Kit, you know, any type of assassins. So she's really good in draft for that reason, but still, Amber's just super consistent. She's got some good range to her, good damage, and that gadget is just broken. So yeah, she's A tier is definitely where she's at. So now we're going to be moving on to the B tier. So most of these B tier brawlers are super consistent, and they're really good in a couple of game modes. So starting off with Belle. So Belle definitely has dropped off a little bit, mainly because there's just better brawlers right now. She's still a super consistent pick right now, but at the same time, I'm not seeing her used as much in competitive. I'm not using her as much in ranked, but again, you can never really go wrong with a Belle and like Bounty and Knockout, so she's still decent. So next up, we have Carl. So again, another underrated pick inside of ranked, mainly because most people don't have the kind of guts to play a good Carl. He can be really aggressive with his flying hook gadget. He deals a lot of damage right now as well, and he's a great counter to a lot of the throwers in the meta. You think of a lot of heist maps as well. Colt's just really good for getting some decent damage. Also, his fire gadget is really good in heist, deals a lot of damage. I don't know, I think Colt is definitely slept on and B tier easily. Next up, we have Mortis. So even though he seems to receive a small buff every update, I think for an assassin, he still is a little bit outdated, especially when you think of other assassins in the game like Kit that can go invisible. You think of even Buzz with his hypercharge. Mortis just doesn't really have that about his game anymore. There's so many counters to him, so he still struggles, definitely in the D tier. Next up, we have Nita. So I wanted to put Nita lower as well, mainly because the map pool completely hard counters her. There's so many good thrower maps, which of course is literally Nita's worst nightmare because she has no way to close the gap. But she still is pretty good in a few scenarios like Hot Potato, where she can still cycle through to her bear quickly. It only takes 10 hits to get her hypercharge, so she can still be pretty impactful. It's just pretty hard to get a good Nita game. Next up, we have Chuck. So Chuck always has the same fate. He's only really good in heist. And I would say right now that a lot of people are actually finding out how to counter Chuck in heist. So maybe he's not as good as he used to be, but he still has a few other use cases in a few hot zone maps like parallel plays. But for the most part, he's mainly a heist brawler. Next up, we have Grom. So the main problem with Grom right now is his projectile speed. It's so easy to juke his shots, especially as a good player, especially with all these hypercharges. Even with snipers, they're able just to juke and pressure Grom too easily. So that's why he's in a D tier easily right now, because he sucks. Next up, we have B. So another brawler that has slowly fallen off in the meta. She used to be super consistent, and even in a tank heavy meta, there's just no point really using B. There's just other brawlers that can do her job much better. Again, not used in competitive for a long time, so she's easily near the D tier. Next up, we have Ems. So again, at the Masters level, Ems is just never really seen. There's a couple of good maps for her though, like Double Swoosh and Center Stage, but still good players will just keep their distance against Ems. She's only really usable as a late pick. You know, if you're looking to counter like Poco compositions or multiple tanks, her hypercharge is really underwhelming, so I think C tier is where she's at. So next up, we have Fang. In terms of ranked, I would say he's near enough towards the D tier, mainly because it's really hard to get a good Fang game, because again, there's just so much that counters him in the ranked meta. If you're just going in blind and ladder, then Fang can always get value, but people know how to counter those assassins in ranked. He's only really good, maybe he's a late pick in a few different bounty game modes, but I'm still not really seeing him used even by the random, so he can't really be that great in the meta. Next up, we have Draco. So he's completely fallen off in comparison to before the update. He was always considered S tier, but definitely at least C tier right now, mainly because there's so many tanks, which of course he can't deal with. He doesn't have the DPS to shred through them. Also, there's just a lot of Draco synergies that people have kind of found out, and they know how to counter his gadget a little bit better. So yeah, Draco's not being used hardly at all. When you compare that to monthly finals a couple of months ago, he was in the top 5. So yeah, he's definitely minimum C tier. So next up, we have Colt. So another brawler that's only really good in heist. He definitely is overplayed a lot by the casuals because it does require some good aim with Colt, but he can still be pretty versatile, especially with his breakthrough gadget that can help counter throwers and just other weird cheesy strategies. But for the most part, stick to heist and you'll be pretty good. Next up, we have 8-bit. So we'll say 8-bit can be really strong in heist, even though there's some brawlers that will impact the game quicker. A good 8-bit, all you need is one push and you'll still shred the heist safe. He's going to be good in a few other scenarios as well. In bounty, if you get the blue star first and just sit back and you spawn with the turret, it's really hard to approach him. In gem grab as a gem carrier, so he's always super underappreciated, but it does take some good synergy to make 8-bit work. Next up, we have a Gene. So a brawler that's always underestimated by the lower end of players because it's pretty hard to play a good Gene, but the reason why he's so good is because he's such a good gem carrier, because he's got the knockback and he's got the main attack that can scout grass pretty easily. He's a great support brawler with his healing star power, and of course his pool can change the game, whether it's gem grab with the gem carrier getting all the gems back. You've got knockout, which can literally win you a round, one pool. If you turn it to 3 versus 2, you win the round. Bounty, he's just consistent and he's also good against snipers, so you can always go a Gene. Next up, we have a Kit. So Kit could easily be an S tier brawler right now. Kit is so broken in knockout and bounty because of the cheesy synergies. I will say people are finding how to counter Kit a little bit easy right now, so that's why Kit's dropped down a little bit, but still pros think Kit is just so good. You can either go Kit in like Brawl Ball, gem grab. If there's any squishy brawlers, Kit's going to have a field day. Next up, we have Max. So Max has dropped off just a tiny bit, mainly because there's too much healing going on in the meta with Barry, also Meg, and Frank has just too much HP. So Max will struggle in the DPS terms, but still Max has such a broken hypercharge, especially with good players. You can group together, get 3/4 of your next super, and just overwhelm the opponent so easily. So Max will forever be an A-tier brawler because of that hypercharge. So next up, we have Buzz. So Buzz's hypercharge definitely carries him right now. Again, there's probably too much Gale and too much Meg with her knockback star power. That impacts Buzz a little bit too much, but still, late on in the draft, you can always contemplate going to Buzz because he'll be the playmaker and the difference maker. Next up, we have Cordelius. So he could easily be towards the A-tier as well, mainly because he's such a fantastic counterpick option, but also he's always Mr. Versatile, mainly because of that jump gadget. A lot of times on maps like penalty kick, you can literally just use Cordelius to counter throwers because you got the jump, and you're just always going to get your super effectively. He's got a good hypercharge as well. He rips through tanks. Mainly, I think the map pool hurts him in this meta, so I'm not really seeing as much Cordelius as before, but I'd say beta is still a good spot. Next up, we have a Dynamite. So everyone should know how good of a late pick Dynamite is. Not first pick in ranked because my randoms go that far too often, and he's so easy to counter early on. A late pick, 5th or 6th pick, because he's a good carry option. You think about it, if they've got no way of closing down Dynamite and it's just squishy brawlers, he'll just destroy them with his hypercharge. So beta is pretty good for him, a good late pick carry. Next up, we have Surge. So he's one of my favorite carry picks in ranked a lot of time, especially on grassy maps like double swoosh, center stage, etc. I will say maybe the map pool impacts him a bit too much, so maybe beta is fair as well, but the right map, he will absolutely dominate. Next up, we have RT. So another brawler that's just good at everything. That's what you want in a ranked draft. You know, of course, he's got that long range damage that can be pretty good once you start tapping. You've got his super and his gadget combination now that will shred through tanks. So that's why a lot of pros go RT, for example, in knockout. If you don't want to face off against Kit, of course, RT is the perfect answer. And then you've got his shield star power that can carry you at the end in knockout. So he's just really good in the rank meta. Next up, we have Brock. So another brawler that's kind of fallen off in terms of his good maps, because he used to be always usable on maps like Belle's Rock and also out in the open, where you'd use his wall break to break up the map and it would be really influential. But again, you think of all the other brawlers in the game, there's just counter him too hard. The likes of Max, Piper, Angelo, they just delete Brock, so there's no point really using him. So next up, we have Charlie. So I feel like CT is fair for her, mainly because her play rates have just fell through the roof, even though I don't think Charlie's changed too much in her gameplay. After trying her a lot the other day in ranked, I don't think she's too bad, but at the same time, there must be something about her where she just struggles in the meta, mainly probably because there's better tank counters out there that deal with the tanks a lot quicker, like Gale, for example. They can get through supers a lot quicker. But yeah, I think she's pretty balanced right now, so C tier is fair. So next up, we have Bo. So Bo has completely fallen off in every kind of category in ranked. Even for the casuals, I'm not seeing them pick Bo on my team. They'd rather go Dynamite or Colt. And of course, in competitive play, he's never used because he doesn't have the damage to keep up, and overall his kit is very lackluster, so he's not very usable, and that's why he's easily a D tier brawler. Next up, we have Bonnie. So she did receive that small rework to her super, only needing 3 hits to get, but the same problem with Bonnie is that she's so easy to kill in her cannon form because she's so slow, and then of course once you jump onto someone, you're just so vulnerable, so it's just way too much of a risk to use her in ranked. She's never used. Next up, we have Bull. So he's completely fallen off in the meta again, mainly because there's just so many better heist brawlers, and he's not even good in heist anymore. You think of the meta ones like Melodie, Chuck, Colette with the hypercharge, they can just advance through and deal a lot more damage than Bull. The only thing that carries him is his hypercharge. His hypercharge is really good, but outside of that, he's not really used whatsoever in competitive. Next up, we have Gus. So he did receive a little bit of a rework to his super not too long ago, but that hasn't really impacted him too much, mainly because of the knockout and bouncing meta really favoring to other sharpshooters out there like Angelo, Piper, Byron. So there's not really a use case for Gus, so he's definitely in the D tier. Next up, we have Shelly. So Shelly's fallen off a little bit, mainly because of the map pool. A lot of the super grassy maps have been removed, so you don't really need that absolute golden tank counter that deletes everything, but still there are a few good maps where they're grassy and you might be scared of a couple of tanks, so you can go Shelly, but for the most part you'd rather just go Gale because he's got that more consistent damage at longer range, so C tier is pretty fair. Next up, we have Sam. So I would say he's one of the best late picks in the game, but only for really good Sam players. I will say in this meta in particular, it's a little bit harder to get a good Sam game. But again, if there's a couple of snipers or a couple of low DPS brawlers, a good Sam will just wreck the map, no matter the game mode or map. So I feel like C tier is fair because he's always dangerous late in the game. So next up, we have El Primo. So he's risen a little bit in the meta, mainly because he counts as one of the best brawlers in the game in Frank. Also, he's pretty good in the Brawl meta still. I'm still seeing a lot of pros use him. But outside of that, he's not really that good. So C tier is where he's at. Next up, we have Stu. So we're starting to see the drop off of Stu as well, mainly because he hasn't got the DPS to keep up with all of his brawlers. Loads of brawlers above him just keep receiving buffs, etc, etc, while Stu's just being left behind. Maybe once he gets a hypercharge, he'll go right back to the top. But again, he's not even being used on maps like Dueling Beetles too much anymore, so maybe he's going to drop off even more. Next up, we have Sandy. So he definitely has dropped off a lot since that hypercharge nerf. Also, there's too many throwers and other lanes have just prevailed a bit more, the likes of Clancy, Chester, etc, that are just better than Sandy right now. There's a few good maps for Sandy, but in pro play, you only really see Sandy in double swoosh, so it could easily be a little bit lower as well. And the same kind of applies with Jessie as well. Her worst nightmares is throwers. And you think of the hot zone meta, for example, on open business, it's just thrower central. So of course she's going to get countered a little bit too much, but she still cycles through to hypercharge pretty quickly. She's still a good tank counter, so she's still pretty prevalent in the meta. Next up, we have Tick. So another brawler that's underappreciated in ranked sometimes, unless you random goes Tick in hot zone for whatever reason. But in pro play, he's pretty much the golden pick in knockout and bounty again, mainly because he outranges the other throwers just so much, so he's just the king of throwers. I will say his hypercharge is a little bit lackluster, so keeping him from the A tier, but again, he's just the king of those game modes. Next up, we have Griff. So I was debating whether to put him in the C tier, but B tier could be alright, mainly because he's got the gadget to break open the walls, and of course he's still a pretty decent tank counter. But I will say there are better lanes out there, but I think B tier is just okay. Next up, we have Melodie. So I will say that she's definitely not as good as she used to be since that HP nerf. It's a little bit easier to shred through her, but still she's super consistent. In heist, she's like one of the best brawlers easily because her notes still do broken damage and you still get free supers. Of course, the right brawlable map, she can pop off. The right gem grab map, she can pop off, but most of the time she needs brawlers that are low in HP so she can quickly and swiftly take them down. So it's just pretty hard to get a good Melodie game. Next up, we have Crow. So ever since people have realized how to use his hypercharge more effectively, especially in pro play, he started to rise back up in the meta. Specifically in heist, when the heist safe is below 50%, you can literally shred it so quickly. He's going to have decent matchups because eventually in this meta, everything is going to feed him. It's so messy, so he's going to get supers and hypercharges pretty easily. And I'm still seeing pros use him even in a few other maps like, I don't know, double swoosh, for example, Undermine, where he can still be pretty good. And he's like a soft counter to brawlers like Gale. So this is definitely a good Crow meta. Next up, we have Gray. So Gray's always a bit of a funny one because he's nowhere near played as much as he was like towards the end of last year because of the synergies with Gray have kind of fallen down a bit, but he's still really powerful brawler. He's got a really good gadget. His super's good at countering those snipers as well. He's just not as impactful as before, but I think Beta is pretty balanced. Next up, we have Jacky. So most of the Jacky cheesy synergies have been completely ruined because there's just so much Meg, Gale, Frank in the meta that counter her too much. And again, I'm not really seeing too many cheesy synergies with Gray and Jacky anymore. And I just don't think the map pool really suits her right now. So I think C tier is fair. Next up, we have Eve. So I'd say she's definitely dropped down in the ranked meta because even though there's 3 really good maps at Eve right now, like Canal Grande, you've got Kaboom Canyon and Out in the Open, pros don't even really pick Eve that much, going to show that she's definitely fallen off a lot. I'm not too sure why, maybe because a lot of the sharpshooters are starting to get hypercharges, but yeah, she's just not the greatest. Next up, we have Leon. So again, another brawler that's going to be overrated by the casuals. In pro play, he's not been used for months and months in competitive, but at the same time, I can still see a use case for Leon. Like, he's okay pretty much everywhere. He's not going to absolutely hard carry, but a good Leon will make those dangerous plays, especially if you get the right composition, but it's all about knowing that. And most of the time, you want to make sure that you're facing off against snipers, really, so you can get the most utility out of Leon. Next up, we have Lola. So I don't think she's been used nowhere near as much in previous metas. She's always been a consistent B tier brawler, but right now, yeah, in competitive, she's just never used. She can be okay and a decent counter to the likes of Meg, but most of the time, there's just a better brawler out there, so that's why she's in the C tier. Next up, we have Squeak. So we'll say he's a little bit underrated in competitive, or maybe overplayed in NA. Sometimes he can be a good late pick because he can still be toxic, especially on maps with a lot of choke points like Canal Grande, for example, and he's his residue gadget is still pretty OP, but for the majority of the part, he lacks the DPS in this really aggressive meta, so that's why he's D tier. So next up, we have Tara. So she's been suffering the same fate for multiple metas now. It's the fact that there's just so many different brawlers that just out damage her consistently in the lane. Of course, as well, there's other lane brawlers that have received hypercharge that just counter her too much, like Sandy, for example. So she's just fallen off in the meta and definitely in the D tier. Next up, we have Mr.p. So he suffers the same fate as the same of Penny, Janet, where he can be consistent into, like, I don't know, squishier brawlers, but he doesn't have the DPS to keep up with most of the meta, so he just gets ran all over, and so he's easily in the D tier. Next up, we have Penny. So she had her limelight a year ago or so, and she's not really found her feet since, mainly because there's just so many different snipers that can outrange her. Her turret gets destroyed too easily, and it's just not really her meta because she doesn't have the DPS to keep up the hypercharges. So yeah, she's easily in the D tier. And lastly, in the D tier, we have Spike. So I know this is going to be controversial, and I know the casual play base will say that Spike is still decent because he will be okay. You know, he's not unusable, but it's the fact that in ranked, in competitive, he wasn't even used before they nerfed his damage. They only nerfed his damage because it's been used so much by the casuals, and I'm not even seeing many casuals using him ranked right now. There's so many better lanes than him, and it's just so many maps in the ranked rotation that just completely counter him because there's so many meta throwers, and again, there's so many brawlers that can just run all over him. He doesn't have the DPS anymore to even win his lane. So he definitely is a D tier brawler. It's just mainly most of the mains are just coping. So next up, we have Mandy, and probably my most annoying brawler in this ranked meta, mainly because Mandy's supers just shred everything. It only takes 4 hits to get that super now, and in knockout, bounty, your randoms aren't going to dodge it for anything, right? They're just going to feed unlimited Mandy supers. So a lot of times I actually end up banning Mandy or just playing it myself. So yeah, go a lot of Mandy. She could easily be A tier. Next up, we have Rosa. So I was even debating putting Rosa a little bit lower. That might have been harsher, but I'm not really seeing her used too much right now. Again, mainly because of the best brawlers in the game. Frank hard counters Rosa. Gale just pushes Rosa so far back that she can't really do anything. But still, when it's a grassy map, you can never really go wrong with Rosa because you've got a slow gadget, and just overall, she will overwhelm a lot of lane brawlers. Next up, we have Ruffs. So I don't know, Ruffs is a little bit of a weird one. He's just never played, one of the least played brawlers in Brawl Stars history. But at the same time, in pro play, pros like him sometimes, you know, for example, maps like Safe Zone, where you can easily combine and make sure you get a lot of power-ups. But I will say most of the time, he is too squishy in the meta, and tanks will still run all over him. So C tier is okay because he's just good in a few moments. Next up, we have Lou. So he's a little bit better in this meta, mainly because of the hot zone meta. You've got the likes of Meg, Frank, and just all of these beefy characters where you can get a lot of Lou supers from. But still, most of the time, it takes too long to cycle through to even his first super. So he's not very impactful in his meta, but still, if you need a big shutdown brawler, then Lou is your guy. Next up, we have Mico. So he's only really good in ranked, mainly because he's such a threat as a last pick. The reason why is because he can counter multiple brawlers at the same time. You know, for example, if you play knockout or bounty, there's typically a couple of sharpshooters or at least one sharpshooter and a thrower. So that is literally Mico heaven, and for that reason, I feel like he's always going to be stuck in the C tier because he just lacks the DPS for any other game mode. Next up, we have Nani. So Nani's an interesting one because against bad players, you're going to be able to hit consistent shots easily, but I think, you know, Nani's not the best in the meta when pros don't really use Nani too much in shooting star. Like, she's not the go-to ban straight away. She's normally like a counter option when the opponent goes like some sharpshooters, whatever else. Whilst, you know, it can be pretty risky to use Nani. She's still like pretty good when it comes down to a few heist maps as well, but again, only as a counter pick, so I think C tier is fair. Next up, we have Poco. So I'm not really seeing him used too much in ranked or competitive right now, but we'll say he's still okay. It's mainly the synergy that you need with Poco. You either need like a stew turret if you're playing like Duel and Beetles, for example, but a lot of the times, even though he heals a lot and can synergize with tanks a lot, there's still just too much for him in the meta, so C tier is okay because he works in some situations. Next up, we have Pearl. So she's starting to drop a little bit in the meta, but still super underrated, mainly because there's a few really good maps to Pearl, for example, like Hideout, and she's a good counter to brawlers like Kit, and sometimes a good counter to snipers because once you get fully heated up, then pop your gadget, you can melt through them. She has a lot of HP, so I will say there are some good use cases for her, but she isn't the threat that she used to be. Next up, we have Pam. So Pam has always been kind of forgotten about, but whenever I see a good Pam game, she seems to carry a lot of time, mainly because of her turret is able just to heal her and whoever's in it for so much because of that mythic gear. She's got a few good maps, but we'll say she's starting to phase out the meta a little bit. Next up, we have Otis. So again, another really underappreciated brawler. He does have a few really good maps like Undermine and Double Swoosh, where I don't see enough people go him because of the vision gear, and his gadget is actually pretty good. And it is a tank heavy meta, so he's okay, but I will say there's just better options out there. And lastly, in the C tier, we have Sprout. So it hurts for me to say this because I always rated Sprout higher, especially because of ranked, but I just don't even think it's that good in ranked right now, mainly because other throws are just so much more dominant, and typically you pick Sprout against other throws because he could outrange them, but I just don't think he has the DPS or the hypercharge to really carry him anymore, so he definitely has dropped a lot. Next up, we have Rico, and Rico is the absolute hard carry in ranks right now. There's so many good Rico maps in the game. Pinball Dreams, Penalty Kick, there's just literally in every single game mode there's a good Rico map, and of course with the hypercharge it just elevates that to a whole new level, rips through everything. He's such a godly pick in this meta. Next up, we have Clancy. So I know what you guys are thinking straight away. On ladder and in the right map, Clancy is definitely an S tier brawler. But I think for the most part, if your teammates are smart, I know that's very rare, you should be able to counter Clancy pretty easily, as long as it's not a super grassy map, as long as you don't let him get to third stage brainlessly and play pretty good Brawl Stars. It's hard for him. There's a lot of maps right now that favor throws as well, that counter him. There's a lot of maps that favor sharpshooters, so that counters him. So it's just pretty hard for him to get a good matchup, because typically he wants tanks. And if you see a Clancy in the draft, you're pretty much never going to pick a tank into him unless you're brainless. But again, he's a good late pick and a really good counter to tanks later on. Next up, we have Byron. So he could easily be S tier as well, but he's the do-it-all brawler right now. He's a good support brawler. He can be a good standalone sniper as well. He cycles through to super so quickly, a gadget that can burst opponents so quickly as well. I will say the thing that hurts him is that there's not a lot of great Byron maps out there, especially throws being able to counter him, but he's still such a fantastic option. Next up, we have Chester. So he's definitely improved so much since the update. This fact that he just deals so much more consistent damage really helps him in the lane battle, and then of course he counters tanks, so even better in this meta. And you've also got the odd chance that he can counter the primarily damage dealer counters. So you know, most damage dealers, they're countered by like throwers, for example, but Chester, he can get the super to open up the map, and then of course with a fast movement speed and a lot of HP, throwers find a hard time of actually killing Chester consistently. So I think he's a kind of good all-round brawler. Next up, we have Buster. So Buster's a perfect brawler in rank no matter the map pool, because you can always get value out of him. You can always group up in game modes like knockout and get a free super. You can always just beast mode with him on grassy maps because you got the super that deflects literally everything. You've got the gadget in combination with 2 attacks that free shot a lot of meta brawlers right now, and even tanks will find a hard time of beating a good Buster player. So it's just whether or not you're good at busting. And lastly, in the A tier, we have Angelo. So Angelo is still such a good brawler in the meta right now, mainly because he's just so good at getting away with his gadget. He's got a very fast movement speed, and of course being a sniper, he can just deal so much damage. The problem with Angelo as well, there's always going to be a good Angelo map in the rotation. You've got Canal Grande, you've got Kaboom Canyon, and it's just so annoying to deal with him because he just feels like he just has unlimited 4K shots. So he's still going to be easily A tier. So now moving on to the best brawlers in the game right now, the S tier, the absolute cream of the crop. I'm going to be starting off with Lily. So I will say that Lily in casual play is falling down definitely to the A tier, but in ranked, you've got to always be careful of a late pick Lily. The Vanish gadget is just so broken, and if you just don't really like team up together and make sure to not be isolated, Lily will just pick you apart so easily. So she's so dangerous. So moving into the 6th best brawler in the game right now, I went with Larry. So in ranked, again, you think of so many maps in a rotation, it's so thrower heavy, and the good thing about Larry is that he's really good at competing with the good knockout and bouncer throwers like Tick and Sprout, for example, because his main attack just pushes brawlers back so quickly. He's got a good super that can defend himself against aggro. His gadget heals and have some good versatility, and you can pretty much play Larry in every single game mode right now. He's just that guy. So now moving into the 5th best ranked brawler right now, we have Barley. So another thrower, but trust me, I've been carrying so hard with Barley in ranked, it's ridiculous. Even as a first pick, Barley carries because he's got such a good star power that can heal him up consistently. Pair that with his healing gadget as well, and the hypercharge that eventually gets. It's so hard. Even if you're an assassin trying to take down Barley, it is pretty already hard. And again, there's just so many amazing maps. I think of Hot Zone maps, Dueling Beetles, and Open Business. He just destroys everything. Knockout and Bounty, he's still being used. And again, there's like Pinball Dreams and Brewable Penalty Kick. It's just thrower heaven right now. And Barley is just broken. So next up, as the 4th best brawler in the game and absolutely S tier, we have Berry. So Berry is just crazy broken because of the trait. The fact that you can get your super through healing yourself, through healing teammates. It just leads to unlimited supers and unlimited control. Even early on in the draft, you know, he's a thrower that can do everything because he's got the healing to support his teammates, he's got the knockback gadget, he's got the super that can finish off low brawlers or use to get away. And then once you just get one super, you can just keep healing up your teammates and push up the map. It's like a Poco, but 10,000 times better. And of course, in a very thrower-heavy ranked map pool, he's just going to dominate. So now moving into the 3rd best ranked brawler right now, we have Frank. So I feel like I might have overrated him just a little bit. But at the same time, even if you don't see Frank in ranked, especially in the draft, you've always got to consider him. You know, if you don't go a tank counter, if you don't go something that has high DPS, someone will just pick Frank and win the game entirely. He still is a really big threat in pretty much every single scenario. Even in knockout, you can use a Frank. So be aware of him, especially if, you know, he gets to low HP. He will still shred you. So yeah, Frank is still OP. So now moving into the 2nd best brawler in the game right now, we have Meg. So Meg just absolutely destroys everything when she gets in range. But the problem with Meg in ranked, why she's not the best, is because you can outrange her and there are counters to her. In knockout and bounty, the sniper meta does counter her a little bit, but still she has 8k HP, and again, you get in range once and they're dead. She does an insane amount of damage. You pretty much go her everywhere, especially in hot zone, brubble. She'll rip through tanks as a mid. Again, the map pool won't favor her completely, but she's still an insane broken brawler. So now moving into the best brawler in the game right now, hands down it has to be Gale. So the thing that's broken him completely is his super rework bug, or whatever it is, it's broken. The fact that you can deal 2k damage consistently plus from maximum range with your super is just game breaking, because it can help finish off so many kills. And of course, you can cycle through to your hype charge so quickly. His hype charge is so good and so underrated. And with Gale, you can go him everywhere. He hard counters the meta right now because of all the tanks and aggression. The slow star power is broken. If you're facing off against a lot of tanks, the stun star power is so good, especially with the hypercharge. And you can use Gale everywhere because you've got the launch pad as well that can be really good at Kaboom Canyon. I don't know, Gale's the one brawler that I can't seem to face off against too much. He's so good in this meta and definitely the best ranked brawler right now. So that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know what you think of the tier list in the comment section below. And if you share this tier list anywhere, make sure to link my video and wherever else. You can see it here. Again, I think this is pretty accurate in terms of ranked, in terms of what I'm seeing, in terms of their threat in the draft. But yeah, that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.
Was ist? Come on.